This is an ODB Films production. Visit odbfilms.com today.
In Latin, Renovo means to renew, restore, or revive. This show is all about growing in our understanding and practice of faith. Past episodes are available wherever you like to listen to podcasts. I'm Doug Tuke, the Director of Ministry at ODB Films, and today we look at the life of Jerome LeJeune, the father of modern genetics. You may be asking yourself, why the heck are we talking about this guy on a Renovo episode? I thought this was like a Catholic ministry podcast. Here's why. The guy is a saint. That's right. There's a 1,000-page document in Rome discerning his status as a canonized saint at some point, probably in our lifetime, and he discovered, trisomy 21, he discovered the extra chromosome that leads to what is known as Down syndrome, and we'll talk more about that later on. Many of you know that my youngest daughter, Gwendolyn Teresa, has Down syndrome. She is unbelievable. She is like the centerpiece of our family. All of my daughters would agree with that and the incredible giftedness she's brought us. So I thought, oh my gosh, let's do a show on this incredible man, holy man of God, and the light that he brings to what Down syndrome is. And I just can't wait for you to get to know him as I have in reading biographies and articles and blogs and all this stuff about him. I cannot wait. Jerome LeJeune said this. He said, just one sentence spoken by Jesus himself will suffice to determine our behavior. That is, whatever you do for the least of my brethren, you do it for me. He delivered that line in a speech that he gave to a number of his doctor friends. This guy is amazing. On April 3rd, 1994, Easter morning, Professor LeJeune was summoned to God. He died on that day. And the very next day, Pope John Paul II, now St. John Paul II, sent this message to the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris, where he's from, that the Heavenly Father should have summoned him on the very day of the resurrection of the Lord must surely be no mere coincidence, but in itself a veritable sign of LeJeune's holiness. How great is that line from St. John Paul II, who was dear friends with Professor LeJeune. So cool. So LeJeune was born in 1926 in Montrouge, France. Jerome LeJeune very soon wanted to become a doctor. He was educated in the classics. He came to be passionately interested in lots of things besides that, the theater, astronomy, music, mathematics. And towards the end of the war, he had to choose a career. He immersed himself with just a lot of passion in the study of medicine. In 1951, he became an assistant to Professor Turpin, and he just completely concerned himself with patients who were known at the time as Mongols, now understood as Down syndrome. Okay, just a quick word on why it's called Down syndrome. So here it is. In 1866, a British physician, John Langdon Down, for whom this syndrome is now named, first described Down syndrome as Mongolism. So that's what Langdon called it, and then later his name got associated with the disease. So the term Down syndrome didn't really become accepted until the early 1970s, mostly because of LeJeune. And then just on a personal note, also there's something really to remember. Dr. John Langdon Down discovered the syndrome, discovered the traits of people with trisomy 21, and it was named after him. He didn't have Down syndrome. So it's not possessive as in Down's syndrome. What we call sometimes in slang, and I do it too, is like, oh, my daughter has Downs. Not really the most politically correct way to do it, which I'm learning. So just so you know, if you ever wonder about that, now you know. Okay, back to LeJeune. Now, a uniquely eloquent advocate for the sanctity of the human person in our lifetime. There's just no equal to Dr. Jerome LeJeune, 1926 to 1994, like we talked about. And we can't really do full justice to his story in just one podcast. It's best told in this beautiful, tender memoir called Life is a Blessing by his daughter, Clara LeJeune Guimard. And in it, Clara recounts her father's groundbreaking medical discoveries, which were driven by his basic, just profound respect for the specialness, the sanctity of every human life, however young, sick, or vulnerable. That's just who he was. LeJeune's most important breakthrough was clearly to uncover the genetic basis for Down syndrome in the presence of an extra chromosome in the DNA of a child born with that condition. And this discovery by itself helped transform tons of patients and their families who had for decades lived under really a false sort of moral stigma since it was widely believed that Down syndrome in a child was the side effect of syphilis in the mother, which was associated really in the popular mind with prostitution. So you can imagine all the social stigma that came with having a child with Downs. Not only did they look different, but people immediately held sort of a derogatory attitude towards the mom. So LeJeune, by offering this rock solid proof of a biological cause for Down syndrome, he helped the parents of these children move in from out of the shadows. I mean, you have to remember that kids with Down syndrome were institutionalized back then, and that it was very socially just it was awkward. It was awful for these families. There was no medical care. There was no real treatment. So LeJeune went on to uncover the genetic basis for another devastating birth defect, Cry-du-Chat syndrome, and made advances in understanding the causes of Fragile X syndrome. Also, he also anticipated the rest of medical science by decades in his insistence on the importance of folic acid in reducing the risk of many birth defects. Now, his discoveries won him a lot of early academic acclaim, a lot. He was very popular. In 1962, he was honored by President Kennedy with the first Kennedy Prize. That's right, he was the first. LeJeune was appointed the first professor of fundamental genetics at the Faculty of Medicine of Paris in 1964. And in 1969, he received the most prestigious honor in his field from the American Society of Human Genetics, the William Allen Award. Now, unlike a lot of scientists of his era, LeJeune saw his work really as deeply rooted in his relationship with patients and their families. This is really what set him apart. Really, the beauty of his story was being a relational doctor, almost like the Patch Adams of his time, He referred to his Down syndrome clients as my little ones. He worked with their families to help them find educational and work opportunities for kids with Down syndrome, consistently taking time away from his research and turning down a lot of opportunities to actually vastly increase his income, basically just to see patients at his low-cost private clinic in France. Incredible stuff. LeJeune's ongoing research for the next 30 years was devoted to understanding the causes of all kinds of genetic disorders and then searching for means to treat these conditions in utero, as well as ways to mitigate the effects of the disorder in children and adults. So to gain for each patient the best and richest life possible. It's also worth noting he actually invented the telephoto microscope. I'm not sure what you call it. You could take a picture through a microscope. He invented that. That's how he discovered the extra chromosome and how by studying these slides that he made. Incredible stuff. So LeJeune took with very religious seriousness the medical vocation and the ethic that has kind of undergirded it since Hippocrates, to do no harm, period, to serve the cause of life, period, to put the interest of the individual patient first, period. Actually, and in the traditional Hippocratic Oath, new physicians specifically promised not to take part in abortions. In 1964, Dr. Louis Lasagna of Tufts University School of Medicine composed a watered-down version that specifically allowed for abortion, a rewrite that is used at most secular medical schools today. Interesting enough, just putting that out there. LeJeune watched with an almost just uncomprehending horror in the 60s and 70s as the majority of his colleagues really rejected key elements of this heritage and embraced a more, just utilitarian, greatest good for the greatest number, kind of a hedonist creed that accepted abortion and allowed for LeJeune's little ones to be seen, not as patients deserving treatment, but as problems that should be prevented. And that just destroyed his heart. So in a bitter irony, the research that LeJeune pioneered also led to the development of prenatal screening tests now used by doctors to detect Down syndrome in unborn babies, most of whom are routinely aborted, which is outrageous given the spirit of LeJeune's research and discovery. So LeJeune denounced this abuse of science as chromosomal racism. Isn't that an amazing line? So the first laws in France permitting abortion were written specifically to target defective fetuses, and LeJeune burned most of his professional and academic bridges when he became one of the few prominent scientists in France to absolutely publicly lobby against these laws. All the way up to 1981, LeJeune would testify before a U.S. Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the question of when human life begins. He was very outspoken. And after recounting the overwhelming biological evidence that the answer is simply conception, LeJeune basically revealed a little of the personal tenderness and really kind of the wonder that the unborn life demonstrated in him as not only a Catholic man, a believer, but also a scientist. Here's a line from him specifically. He says this: "Thanks to a refined sonar-like imagery, Dr. Ian Donald from England a year ago succeeded in producing a movie featuring the youngest star in the world, an 11-week-old baby dancing in the uterus. The baby plays, so to speak, on a trampoline. He bends his knees, pushes on the wall, soars up and falls down again. Because his body," LeJeune says, "has the same buoyancy as the amniotic fluid, he does not feel gravity and performs his dance in a very slow, graceful, and elegant way, impossible in any other place on Earth. Only astronauts in their gravity-free state can achieve such gentleness of motion." By the way, for the first walk in space, LeJeune says, technologists had to decide where to attach the tubes carrying the fluids. He says they finally chose the belt buckle of the suit, reinventing the umbilical cord. And then he goes on, "When I had the honor of testifying previously before the Senate, I took the liberty of referring to the universal fairy tale of the man smaller than the thumb. At 2 months of age, the human being is less than 1 thumb's length from the head to the rump. He would fit at ease in a nutshell. But everything is there," LeJeune says. "Hands, feet, head, organs, brain, all are in place. His heart has been beating for a month already. Looking closely, you would see the palm creases, and a fortune teller would read the good adventure of that tiny person. With a good magnifier," LeJeune continues, "the fingerprints could be detected. Every document is available for a national identity card." And finally, he says, "With the extreme sophistication of our technology, we have invaded his or her privacy. Special hydrophones reveal the most primitive music, a deep, profound, reassuring, hammering at some 60 to 70 per minute, the maternal heart, and a rapid, high-pitched cadence at some 150 to 170, the heart of the fetus. These mixed mimic those of the contrabass and the maracas, which are the basic rhythms of any pop music." He closes, "We now know what he feels. We have listened to what he hears, smelled what he tastes, and we have really seen him dancing, full of grace and youth. Science," LeJeune says, "has turned the fairy tale of Tom Thumb into a true story, the one each of us has lived in the womb of his mother." Whoa! In his testimony to Congress, right? Right? So LeJeune would return to the U.S. later on to testify in the frozen embryo case, Davis versus Davis, that every embryo should be treated as a patient and not a commodity. And he correctly foresaw the outcome of designating tiny human beings as property and not people. And that's the fate of the hundreds of thousands of frozen embryos that now really languish in a technological limbo across the world, which scientists are hungrily seeking out for use in stem cell research. So these infinitesimal human beings will either sit in freezers indefinitely or be really cannibalized for parts. These are human beings. And LeJeune was really the first one to say that publicly. So as his daughter documents in the incredible book, which you should totally read, LeJeune's activism really just led directly to his loss of research money, to the end of his academic advancement, and really to a professional sort of isolation that would absolutely prevail until the end of his life. She wrote of her father's fate. She says this, Clara says, "But here is a man who, because his convictions as a physician prohibited him from following the trends of his time, was banned by society, dropped by his friends, humiliated, crucified by the press, prevented from working for lack of funding. Here was a man who became, for certain people, a man to be beaten down, for others, a man not worth jeopardizing your reputation with, and for still others, an incompetent extremist." That's quite a line. She's saying about her dad, because she saw it firsthand. She saw how he was treated in the public sphere. Unbelievable. So Clara LeJeune, LeJeune's daughter, really just kind of recounts that even she found herself shunned at university because her father's activism, as if the guilt from, crimes against public opinion had really been transmitted genetically to her. Just gross. So what recognition LeJeune still received began to come from those who shared his concern for the sanctity of life. And in 1981, he met with Pope John Paul II, as it turned out, just a few hours before the attempt on the pontiff's life. Isn't that unbelievable? It was right before he got shot. And he joined the Pontifical Academy for Science. In 1994, Pope John Paul II at the time would name LeJeune head of the newly established Pontifical Academy for Life, specifically. So LeJeune would not be able to accomplish much in that position as he was already dying of cancer at the time. After a really long, agonizing illness, LeJeune died on Easter Sunday, no less, 1994. One of his last requests, his daughter says, was that spaces be saved at his funeral for the little ones, specifically patients with Down syndrome that he had worked with over time, the Down syndrome patients whom he just loved, truly to the very end. So during the World Youth Days in Paris in August 1997, the Pope actually visited his friend's grave in Châlons-Saint-Mars. The cause for the beatification and the canonization of Jerome LeJeune was opened in Paris on June 28th, 2007. And the Jerome LeJeune Foundation was created as a state recognized as a public asset in 1996 in furtherance of his actions, LeJeune's actions. It has really a triple mission. The LeJeune Foundation is all about research, healing, and defending. An amazing organization. So the foundation is doing incredible work. They have an aspiration, which is just unbelievable. They want to open a Mayo Clinic type facility in the U.S. that's really just an exhaustive treatment and support hospital for multiple special needs and neurological disorders and challenges. What an incredible mission. And you should check that out. You should learn more about them at foundationlejeune.org. So this is his life. Unbelievable. I mean, his life, in 1957, he was an expert in atomic radiation. 59, discovers trisomy 21. 63, Kennedy acknowledges him. 64, he's the first chair of human genetics at the Paris School of Medicine. He's the chair of cytogenetic services in a pediatric hospital. He has 9,000 patients. 69, he's acknowledged by American scientists, William Allen Award. 74, welcomed into the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences. 81, the Academy of Moral and Political Sciences. And by 1994, the president of the Pontifical Academy for Life. Unbelievable. He died April 3rd, like we mentioned before, 94. He's kind of called home. 97, John Paul II prays at the tomb of his brother, Jerome, and that's where his beatification cause really started. With the seeds were planted, essentially. June 28th, 2007, the cause is opened formally. 2012, April 11th in 2012, there's a diocesan process that concludes in Paris, actually. And December 7th, 2012, Aude Dugost is named the postulator for the process in Rome, and Father Jean-Charles Nolte was named the vice postulator. So people are assigned specifically to his case. February 21st, 2013, Congregation for Saints causes decrees the official opening of the process in Rome. So he is well on his way to a life of holiness. Friends, I'm so excited. I'm thankful to get to share Jerome LeJeune's story, but I think it's just important for folks to realize, there's countries like Iceland who very publicly declare their success, quote unquote success, of eradicating Down syndrome as if it were a condition that defeats the meaning of life. And the same could be said for other neurological challenges, genetic challenges like Asperger's and autism. And I think it's important for all of you to know, especially those of you that have never had a real intimate experience with special needs. And you just need to understand this. If I, as a parent, had the opportunity right now, if there was some way through genetic counseling to change my Gwendolyn, to change who she is, to take away who she is, I can tell you, with my hand on the Bible, there is no way I would ever want her to change. There's no way. So I think what the steep learning curve that needs to happen here, and the greatness that Dr. LeJeune really brought to us, especially as a church, is that the inherited genetic challenges like this are a gift. That there's giftedness in this creation. That as a young couple in utero, you find out that your child has the possibility of having Down syndrome. If that is causing you a panic or a stir, I think what's important is for you to understand that you really have been drenched with grace, that there's a beauty there that you never could have predicted, and you have no idea how you're going to navigate it, but that there's so much grace and innocence that comes. My daughter Gwen only knows how to love. That's all she knows how to do. And her whole life, it will be very different than parenting my other 4 children, but she loves in a way that is completely unique to her. And she brings people to a place of joy and peace in a different way than my other children. And to stifle that uniqueness, to say, I don't want that, is to say, I don't want life. There's no such thing as a perfection of genetics. There's no such thing. And I think for us to dismiss the gift that is trisomy 21, that is Down syndrome, is preposterous. And I think Dr. LeJeune really brought that awareness to our lives. And an incredible scientific basis for when life begins, true life, all of which should be cherished. So Saint Jerome LeJeune, pray for us, right? We pray for his intercession, not only on the pro-life movement, but on all of us that are encountering special needs in our lives. We just pray that he will continue to advocate for special needs, certainly in heaven. What a gift. Thanks for listening. Sincerely, we are partners in the journey of faith. I really hope you'll share the Renovo podcast with friends and foes. Send your topic suggestions, questions, and or comments to doug@odbfilms.com. Always remember to engage the tradition and live the conversion. Until next time, God bless.